Welcome to another live guest interview within Mindful Journey. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. We're so excited to have you here. And if you've been with us, of course, for a number of these conversations, well, welcome back. And we're also grateful that you're here with us and continuing to engage with Mindful Journey. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat function, and then we'll get to them on the back end of the conversation. I'm so excited to bring you our guest today, Jon Macaskill. Although Jon and I have not formally met in person, we were well, not necessarily introduced. I'd learned of his work from a friend of mine who'd been exposed to some of Jon's teachings at an organization in North Carolina. And then Jon and I had the chance to connect via Zoom about 6 weeks or so ago. And I felt just the sincerity and the desire from him to serve. And I hope and trust that you're all going to feel that today. Jon has a unique background, and many of you likely had seen his bio in advance. And not only is he a mindfulness and meditation teacher today, where he delivers keynotes to organizations throughout the globe on things beyond mindfulness like leadership, resilience, grit, compassion. But Jon also served for a number of years within the Navy SEALs. He spent time in Iraq, Afghanistan, off the coast of Somalia, and in Panama, if memory serves me correct from his bio. He's currently based out in Colorado Springs, Colorado, with his wife and I believe 3 children, if not mistaken, and
Right.
has so much to offer as it relates to not only just mindfulness, but perspective as how it is that we might be able as people to get through obstacles and adversities. Because no matter where it is that you are at in your life today, we all face challenges and hardship, whether personally or professionally, sometimes both. And being able to make some small shifts in daily habits to not only to be here now more often, but to get around those things is advantageous for all of us. So with all that being said, and without further ado, Jon, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for that awesome intro, Adam. That you nailed it, man. Well done. Great to be
Thank
here.
you. Thank you. I'd love, Jon, if you could just give us a high level overview of your work now, and then maybe what led you to this point. Because again, I know a little bit about your story, but I think it's so compelling as to what got you here in mindfulness.
Sure. Yeah. The work that I do now is just like you mentioned at the beginning there, through keynotes, workshops, retreats, and my own podcast that I co-host with a buddy of mine called Men Talking Mindfulness. And the vision behind all of those is just to bring mindfulness and meditation, and I say those two separately, very intentionally, because there is a difference. But the goal is to bring mindfulness and meditation to as many people as we possibly can. I have a big, hairy, audacious goal of bringing it to 1 million people, if I can. Maybe more down the road. We'll see. But the reason that I feel that is my goal is I had my own mental health challenges when I was in the SEAL teams. I struggled with the death of some of my friends, the not being on the battlefield. Kind of ironically, a lot of people think most mental health challenges come from the battlefield, and a lot do, but mine actually came from not being on the battlefield when my friends were, and losing my friends on the battlefield when I was in an office taking phone calls and being on the computer and kind of monitoring from behind the scenes. And that caused me survivor's guilt and moral injury and depression and anxiety that I struggled with for a while. And eventually a counselor that I was seeing recommended mindfulness and meditation to me. And long story short, after initially pushing against it and thinking that mindfulness and meditation were kind of hippy dippy woo woo practices that didn't really do anything, once I learned the physiology behind it and I understood the science, and then I started to practice myself and I started to see the changes in my life, I thought and still feel to this day that mindfulness and meditation changed my life for the better, but also quite literally saved my life.
Mm,
And because of that, I feel it's a duty and an obligation to pay it forward with
mhm,
anyone and everyone who will listen. So that's why I
mhm.
do what I do today. It's not what I thought I would be doing, 10 or 15 years ago when people said, "Hey, when you retire from the military, If somebody had told me, hey, you're going to be a mindfulness and meditation teacher and have a podcast and be running retreats, I would have thought, hey, you're talking to the wrong guy. That's not me. But
Yeah.
yeah, lo and behold, here I am doing just that.
Yeah. That's amazing, John. I'm so glad you touched on, I think you used the word like hippie, if you will. And I often say it's, people think mindfulness is woo woo and you've got to be in a dim lit room with the candles on and, soft melodies playing. And obviously you and I know that's certainly not the case. But for those
Right.
listening in who might have some resistance to mindfulness, I'd be curious to hear from your perspective, what did you think about mindfulness that caused you initially to resist it when your therapist brought it up? As somebody who was operating in the SEALs, and I think today, our society looks at the SEALs as the most elite of elite, understandably so. But as somebody who was in that, type of type A environment, who is not your typical individual to engage, how were you able to break through, and what was your view of
Mm.
mindfulness?
Yeah, I mean, I think I essentially expressed my view with with the hippy dippy
Okay, with
woo
the
woo
hippie.
is
Okay.
yeah, that's what I thought it was at the time. I was very naive. And when the counselor recommended it to me, I laughed in his face. I was like, Doc, I need something that's really going to help me. Like I was looking for a pill or some type of quick, easy fix. And then he kind of flipped the script on me and sold it to me as a performance enhancement. He said,
Mm,
what if I had a pill that I could give to you that would change the way that you feel, the way that you perform mentally and physically, personally and professionally? And I was like, as a type A personality in an ultra masculine community, I'm always looking for an edge. I'm looking for an edge over my enemy on the battlefield, or I'm looking for an edge over my buddy right next to me. And
mm,
when he put it that way, I was like, yeah, doc, of course I would take that pill. And of course the pill was not or it was not a pill, it was meditation. And
mm,
so the next day, now that it's a performance enhancer, I think that I'm going to sit down and crush an hour-long meditation day one. And I sit down with a guided meditation on one of the apps that is out there, and
mm,
I listened to about 25 seconds of it, and my mind was on anything except the meditation. And now I'm convinced that I'm too busy. I am not a person who can meditate. I'm too high performing. I've got too many things in my mind, whatever. I convince myself of every single excuse of why I could
mm.
not meditate.
Yep.
And I go back to that same counselor a week later, and I told him what I just told you. And he says, well, what did you do? How did you start? And I told him what I just told you again. And he says, well, that's like lining up at the starting line of a marathon without ever having run a foot before, without ever having run a step, or going into the weight
Mm,
room and never having lifted weights before and trying to get under 350 pounds on the bench press. And now he's
mm,
speaking my language, and now I'm like, okay, so what do I do? And he said,
mm,
well, I want you to try this breath work. I want you to try what's called box breathing. And he explains it to me. He says, this breathing in for a count of four, holding for a count of four, breathing out for a count of four, and holding for a count of four, and doing that 4 or 5 times. And I was
mm,
like, Doc, we do that in the teams. We do that in the SEAL teams. We call it tactical breathing. We do it to, control our heart rate or reduce our heart rate on the shooting range so that we can shoot between heartbeats. We do it so that we can reduce our respiratory rate for the same reason. We do it so that we can see more, because as you get stressed out, you kind of start to look through a soda straw. And really, when you're on the battlefield or in war, you don't want to be looking through that soda straw. So we take a couple of deep breaths and the box breathing technique or the tactical breathing technique, and we see more on the battlefield. And we had never called it box breathing. We had never called it mindfulness. We'd never called it meditation. And because they put that cool tactical word in front of it, it seemed like it was something cool to do. But here I am now doing it for a different reason. I'm doing it to calm myself down in everyday scenarios. I'm doing it, when I'm getting stressed in the office. I'm doing it when I'm getting cut off by somebody in traffic, and my
mm.
initial reaction is to flip them the bird and get angry. And then I'm like, hey, you know what? Maybe take a couple of box breaths and a couple of cycles of box
Mm,
breathing. And so I started to do that. And then I started to feel confident that I could sit down for a longer, more in-depth kind of more touchy-feely, if you will, meditation. And I started to do some loving kindness meditations and some
Mm,
self-compassion meditations. I mean, a lot of similarities there. Um, and and some body scans, those types of things. And I started to feel the difference. And over about, they say the magic number is 8 weeks. And it was pretty close, about 2 months or so after practicing, I started to feel different. But then I thought, okay, maybe it's just I'm convincing myself that I feel different.
mm.
And then I had somebody at work come up to me and they pulled me aside and they're like, "Hey, John, what are you on? As in what are you taking?" And
Right,
at this
right.
point, I was like, okay, so it's not just me that realizes that there's a change in the way that I'm performing, the way that I'm acting, the way that I'm feeling. And so initially my gut reaction was tell them that I'm on some type of anti-anxiety medication or something, but I wasn't. And I didn't want to lie. So I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna have to admit to this guy that I'm meditating.
Meditating.
Yeah. And the thought in my mind was when I tell him this, he's gonna turn around, his eyes are gonna glaze over, he's gonna turn around and never talk to me again because he now thinks that I'm this dippy weirdo.
Yeah.
And the exact opposite happened. He's like, "What? Really? Tell me more about that." And
Mm,
then after a few weeks, he's like, "Hey man, I want to try this meditation stuff out. Could you guide me through a meditation?" At the time, I wasn't a meditation teacher. I never even thought that I was going to be a meditation teacher. And he's like, "Hey,
mhm,
could you guide me through a meditation?" So I was like, "Well, I'll try. I'll walk you through some of the ones that I've been doing, at least
mhm.
haphazardly." And I did. And for a few weeks, we met regularly, and I guided him through that meditation. And then I started to see changes in him, and he started to see changes in himself. And
Mm,
then I was like, oh, you know what? maybe there's something here. Maybe I could
mhm,
do this for a living.
mhm,
And it was around the same time that I was starting to consider getting out of the military.
mhm,
For the reasons that you mentioned, I've got 3 young kids, and that's a handful. And it's also, a family that I don't want to leave, either for deployment or for other reasons. I don't want to leave because I was hurt in combat or worse. So I decided I was going to get out, and I told some people that I was going to become a mindfulness and meditation teacher, and they're like, "You're kidding, right?" They're like, "There's no money to be made in that." I was like, "Well, if it was always about the money, I never would have joined the military in the first place."
mm,
So it's about something deeper than that. It's about giving back and
mm,
serving your fellow man and making the world a better place.
mm,
So that which caused me to join the service in the first place is
mhm,
what kind of drove me to do what I'm doing now as a
mm.
mindfulness and meditation teacher after the service.
Yeah, I love that you said that, John. And as I mentioned in my intro, and I think I told you the day we connected, I felt that from you initially, just not only for your, right away willingness to join this conversation, and want to collaborate on some things in the future, but the tone and sincerity and the compassion that lies there. So we need more of that. Is all I'm trying to say. Not to pat you on the back, but I guess it's a pat on the back after all, but we need more of that, right? Because I think as our world is so consumed with self and on making a dollar and checking a box at work, we miss the opportunity to bring about a passion inside of us that can actually keep us going through the hard times. So I know for me, like anyone, I face hardship and difficulty, and I like to think that I'm here all the time, but
Sure.
in those down moments when I lose a business deal or somebody cuts me off in traffic, it's like, what do I have to revert back to? And having something bigger than me that is purposeful can drive beyond the pain. So I'm glad that you touched on that because I'd love to hear from your vantage point as it relates to when you have faced difficulty in this meditation journey, because it's not easy, right? A business pursuit is not easy, a lot different than the military, I would suspect. I don't have a
Sure.
military background, but when you have faced this uncertainty in your path now, have you been able to rely on that purpose of something bigger than you? And if so, can you give us an example of what that may have looked like? Is there a practice, a habit, or ritual that you rely on to help you kind of recalibrate and get back to center?
Yeah. I always, when I'm struggling, or whether or when I'm starting to think, you know what, I should just stop doing what I'm doing, go find a 9 to 5 job and do that. Not that there's anything wrong with a 9 to 5 job. It's just not, that's not who I am anymore. I found myself to be completely unmanageable. I struggle to report to others these days, after retiring as a middle level officer in the SEAL teams. To come back to kind of the bottom of the totem pole, it's tough for me. So doing what I'm doing is where I kind of feel I fit. But there's times still that I struggle and question what I'm doing. And I always think back to, a speech that Steve Jobs said, and I'm sure we've all heard it, or a line that Steve Jobs said in one of his speeches is that you can't connect the dots looking forward. You have to connect them looking backward. And that means that you have to have some level of faith in yourself, in God, in spirit, or whatever. And you have to love what you do. And I love what I do, even when there are struggles, even when there are down times. And that, I believe, makes me a happier person in my life, makes me a better husband, a better father, a better friend. And in times when I'm struggling, I'm like, well, you know what, this struggle is actually part of the journey. This struggle is part of the growth, right? No entrepreneur ever goes from zero to huge success without some type of struggle. Nobody in any walk of life goes from zero to success without some type of struggle, whether that is a 9 to 5, an entrepreneur, or an athlete, or a musician. Nobody just suddenly magically becomes this huge success. They have to put in the work, and they have to overcome the obstacles, the challenges, the adversity. And that's where the growth truly lies, right? And Ryan Holiday's "The Obstacle is the Way," that is truly the way of growth. And the other thing that I try to do is, when I do experience these struggles, and I get upset, I get stressed, I get anxious. I mean, being a mindfulness and meditation teacher and practitioner does not make you immune to those. It just changes your relationship with them, and makes you see them differently and handle them differently. But when I do get that way, it's very easy to ask, why is this happening to me? And it's important to stop and realize that you're asking that question, and then reframe that question and say, why is this happening for me? What can I get out of this? How can I grow from this? How is this going to make me a better entrepreneur? How is this going to make me a better mindfulness teacher? How is this going to make me a better husband, father, friend? So those are how I handle the challenges, the tough times that inevitably are going to come. They have come, they're here already, and they're going to come again in the future. So why not change the way that you look at them and handle them?
Yes, yeah, the reframing piece is so powerful. I just wanted to reiterate that for those listening in, because it's I have to versus I get to. Those types of those types of reframing can allow us to see something completely different, and it requires us to slow down to get there, though, which is why I believe, whether it be a formal meditative practice, or just saying to yourself, "Be here now," and being mindful can allow you to see the whole picture, as opposed to just looking at something, as I think you'd said before, through a straw, which obviously narrows the vision. So
Right.
really love that, John. I'd like to go back
I
into.
quickly,
Go ahead.
it,
Yeah,
it
sure,
just,
sure.
I did not answer your question about the practices when I get into that state. And
Okay, yeah.
you mentioned kind of the reframing piece, and the reframing is definitely an important piece. And I'm actually part of this group that it's a bunch of men that support one another, and the saying is that we get to do this, we get to do this.
Mm,
But there's also another important, I won't necessarily call it a practice, but it's a way of looking at things. It's giving yourself grace and compassion. And a lot of the time when we start to struggle with whatever is happening in our lives, we start to beat ourselves up for struggling. And then it's just this downward spiral. Now you're beating yourself for beating yourself up, right? And it's just continual. And we had on our podcast, I'm going to forget her name now, but we had a self-compassion expert. And she said an important phrase that you have to remember is when you're going through something, you have to look at why you're experiencing it, why you're experiencing the pain, the anxiety, the sadness. And rather than beating yourself up for experiencing that, tell yourself, of course I feel this way. Of course I feel this way because, I've lost a close friend. Of course I feel this way because I have a mountain of work piling on me at work. Of course I feel this way because, I'm a parent of 3 young kids who are a handful, and it gets to be a lot. And that term, that phrase, when I say, of course I feel this way, then I can dump the shame that I have for feeling that way and just acknowledge it and be with it, sit with that feeling. And then I get through it, because the only way out is through, right? And that has been a very powerful reframe or practice for me, is to say, you know what, I've got this and this and this and this going on. Of course I feel this way. I'm a human being. It's natural. So sorry to interrupt you before your question, but I wanted to make sure I got that in there.
I'm so happy you did, because it would have been a piece that we would all miss, and accept. What I'm hearing from you on that is like an acceptance versus a resistance, right?
Yes, yes, yes. And I'm glad you said that too, because I did a meditation this morning that was all about witness and accept. And I mean, it was witness and accept the emotional things, but also witness and accept all the physical. Like, hey, do you have pain in your shoulder? Do you have pain anywhere in your body? Witness it, accept it, just be with it. And man, acceptance is such a powerful thing that so few of us actually practice in our lives.
Yes, yes. Would you mind sharing about that? Kind of triggers a thought with me about the body scan,
Mm,
because that has been helpful for me, as I've dealt with. I've been fortunate. I've not had a lot of bodily pain. I don't know if I'd shared this with you, but I referee college basketball, so my knees have taken a toll a little bit over the years. I used to love running outdoors. I've run a few half marathons and a marathon, and I still run because it's therapeutic. But anyways, I'm sharing all this to say, when I've done my own guided meditations, the body scan of just being aware of where tension is arising or pain is arising has been
yeah,
particularly helpful in almost releasing. Would you mind sharing with the listeners what a body scan is,
sure.
and what you're supposed to do, if anything?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the body scan, that it sounds a little weird, but it really, all it is just paying attention to the different parts of your body in a kind of a phased approach. Some people do it from their toes to their head. Some people do it from their head to their toes. Some people do it down and back. This one in particular that I did this morning, we start at the crown of your head, and you just pay attention with intention. You pay attention to the crown of your head. You notice the physical feelings at the crown of your head and the crown of your head only. Now, yes, you're going to still experience physical sensation all over your body, but you want to focus exclusively on the crown of your head, and then scan down to your forehead or your temples, and then scan down to your eyes and your jaw, your nose, your tongue, your mouth, your chin, and then scan all the way through your body, one part at a time, paying attention to what you're feeling there physically, but also how emotions can manifest in those parts, right? If you've ever read the book The Body Keeps the Score, there are emotions that lock themselves up in your body. They may lock themselves up in your joints, in your muscles, but it can cause tension, physical tension in your parts of your body. And when you notice that physical tension, you don't necessarily need to change it. You can just, again, accept it, like we talked about before. Or if you are going to change it, all you do is breathe into it. And what I mean by that is focus on that part of your body. So let's say you have tension in your chest and you notice it, you breathe into it by being aware of that part of your body and taking a very intentional and focused breath and imagining that breath going into that part of the body and that part of your body exclusively. And then you breathe out, focusing again on that part of your body and kind of letting go of that tension or whatever it is that's manifesting in that particular part. Now, it may help immediately, it may not, but it's a visualization. And then you continue to scan down to your toes and then back up if that's what works for you. But the idea there is that with the scan, it's kind of easy to focus on one part of your body at a time. And in focusing on one part of your body at a time, you tune out all the rest of the noise of the world, the deadlines at work. It's basically the body scan in and of itself serves as an anchor, a focus point for you in the meditation. And that can be a really great way to stay focused when you do have a lot of distractions that are out there, which we all do in this day and age. We have a ton of distractions, right? Family, friends, work, your vehicle, your bills, taxes. I mean, you name it. We've got a bazillion things coming at us. And when you're focusing on the sensation in your chest, that's what you're focusing on. You're not thinking about the other things. So that's a great way to think of the body scan, if you will. There's also, progressive relaxation body scans where you kind of start at the top of your head and you intentionally tense the different muscles. So you may tense your forehead and then really clench your jaw and then tighten your throat and tighten your muscles. And that's another like physical and active body scan, but it's a physical phased relaxation. And as you do that, man, that's a great one to do just before you go to sleep. You like any tension that you were holding before is normally quickly released in that phase relaxation or progressive relaxation technique. It's phenomenal.
That's great. I've not tried that, and so progressive relaxation is the terminology for it.
Yeah, progressive
I'm
relaxation.
excited. I'm excited to try that, John. There's a few comments that came in, and I just wanted to. Usually, I try to wait till the back end, but just wanted, and you should be able to see them on your end too.
I see them. I do.
So it looks like Hin says acceptance disarms the negative thoughts. Carlos, Austin, I love this discussion webinar. Thanks, Carlos. Glad you're here. Of course, I feel this way. We need to keep this in mind. Basically, great job to you. Looks like fellow military.
There you go.
And
Simplify.
Yep. So thank you both for your service. And then Hind also said, I relate to the self-compassion piece so much. I struggle with that a lot. I think I'd like to touch on that piece that Hind shares there about I relate to the self-compassion piece so much. But I think a lot of people do. And, we're living in this world now with social media. And I've had candid conversations with friends of mine. In fact, a gentleman we'd had on this, he's retired Marriott exec, been very successful from society standards, teaches at Cornell University, retired from his career at Marriott over 25 years in his late 50s. And he'd said to us openly, he said, I have distanced myself from social media because I became aware that I was on it and my emotional well-being was dependent upon the number of likes and engagement.
Sure.
He said, Adam, I'm a man who people would look to and say, got it together and have been pretty successful. And he said, it dawned on me that if I, as somebody who's in my late 50s, am going back to social media the next day to see if somebody liked it or why they didn't engage, etc., what's happening with college kids or people, right out of college or high school kids. And we don't serve a lot of that community within Mindful Journey, but we're all human and we all are constantly comparing self to others. And there's an old adage, the comparison's a thief of joy. I'm giving you a long-winded ask, John, going back to Hind's comment of self-compassion. How can we feel more compassion for self? Is there anything that we can point to, that you can point to, that will allow us to, remove the distractions that are social media and this comparison and just look inwardly and give that compassion to self?
Yeah. I think those are two separate but related questions. The social media piece, that comes to mindfulness. You have to be mindful of what it is you're doing and what your intention behind it is, right? Are you getting on social media to see what your friends are doing, to see, some happy snaps of their cats and dogs and maybe their kids, and stay in loose contact, at least be aware of what it is they're doing? Or are you going on social media to feed your ego? And that's by the number of connections that you have, the number of likes that you have, the number of engagements that you have on a particular post or whatever. And I recently read this book. I forget who the author is. There's two books entitled the same thing. It's called Generations, and the one that I read is by a woman. I'm forgetting her name off the top of my head, but it breaks down, the greatest generation all the way through Generation Z, and why they are the way they are, the good and the bad. And as I'm 46 years old. So where does that put me? I'm just shy of the millennials. Where does that put me? I'm forgetting the name of that generation. Anyway, it
I
doesn't
don't
matter.
know. I'm bad with the generations, admittedly.
I'm not a baby boomer. Oh my gosh, I'm forgetting. Maybe
Let's
somebody
see
can
if we
help
got
us
a
in the
comment.
comments.
Yeah, it looks like a comment came through.
X, yes, thank you.
X.
Thanks. Oh my gosh, I need to have some coffee this morning. But yeah, so Generation X. So Generation X looks at the millennials and they say, oh, those darn millennials. And then the millennials look at Generation Y and Z and they say, this is the end of society. Well, anyway, this book breaks down why we are the way we are. And you think about when social media really took off was with the smartphone and having social media in your pocket all the time, being able to take pictures of everything all the time and then post those pictures and post everything that you're thinking. Basically, like when you become addicted to social media, you'll know it, because basically everything that you do, you think about, how can this be posted on social media? How can my meal be posted on social media and make sense? How can what I'm doing right now, how can this new pair of shoes, how can whatever get posted on social media? And when you start thinking in your life about everything that you do and how it will be reflected on social media, you're addicted. Now, where I'm coming with this whole generation book is it says that with the smartphone in about 2013, 2014 smartphone came out like 2007, but it really became ubiquitous and connected to social media in like 2013, 2014. And you can see a dramatic drop in mental health in youth, in like the 16, 17-year-olds, and particularly amongst young girls, because they were getting on, and young boys, they may compare themselves to other young boys, but it's normally like, hey, I got a new car, or I don't know, I'm number one in sports. But young girls are comparing their bodies and the number of likes they have, and there's a lot of bullies. Even boys will get on a girl's account and bully her for not having a perfect body or a perfect face or whatever. And so young girls were particularly susceptible to this. So the social media can be really great if you use it for the right reasons and you're very intentional behind it and you recognize when you're addicted to it. The flip side is that it can be very harmful, and we have to be aware of when it's harming us. And we have to, as parents, I'm a parent, so I've got young kids who are not on social media yet, but they will be. And I saw something the other day that said, hey, introduce your children to social media when you no longer want them to be children, and it robs them of their childhood. Sorry, I'm going all over the place and getting on my soapbox with regards to social media, but the bottom line is I think social media is a double-edged sword. It can be used for great things, making people aware, raising funds, raising awareness of greatness in the world, making, I don't know, it can be great, but it can also be harmful. Now, the self-compassion piece that you asked about, I teach on that, and my podcast co-host is a compassion ambassador. He just went through this program run at Stanford called C-Care, which is the Center for Compassion and Altruistic Research and Education. So C-Care, and it's founded by a neurosurgeon. Again, I'm spacing on his name. He wrote the book Into the Magic Shop, and he learned how to meditate at a very young age, but he ended up using it for all the wrong things, like bringing stuff into his life, success, at least worldly success. And he ends up being worth $85 million or something, and having his own island and Lamborghinis and Ferraris and all these things that he had written a list of what he wanted in his life. And he realized that none of it made him happy. And then he realized that the parts of his meditation that were lacking were self-compassion and compassion for others. And he founded the Center for Compassion and Altruistic Research and Education at Stanford. And my podcast co-host Will just went through that and has become a compassion ambassador. And I'm learning from him as we go along. But the ways to increase self-compassion is to imagine yourself as somebody else. So the way that I teach it, I don't know if you remember the scene, but when Jennifer Reynolds went up on stage at the Oscars to receive her Oscar for one of the movies, and she tripped. Now, whether or not, you know, that particular thing was staged or not for publicity, there's a scene where she trips at the Oscars. And, you know, if you could envision yourself at the pinnacle of your career, going up on stage in front of the world to be recognized for your success, and then you envision yourself falling, what are some of the words that are going through your mind when that happens? Some of them are probably like, you idiot, fool, of course this was going to happen, you're never going to recover from this, these types of things. So we beat ourselves up. Now flip that script and imagine that person tripping at the pinnacle of their career is a friend of yours. And what do you say? Most of the time you're like, it's okay, nobody saw that, you're going to recover from this, it's okay, buddy, that kind of thing. So we have compassion, we have more compassion for a friend than we do for ourselves. Now taking that one step further, imagine that person being a complete stranger for whom you have zero feelings, neutral feelings, not negative, not positive, you just see them as another human being. Same thing happens. Probably the same words are going through your mind. It's okay, you've got this. Oh, I feel so bad for you. So the reason I tell that story is to show that we quite often have more compassion for a complete stranger than we do for ourselves. Now, the way that we develop compassion is that we have to imagine ourselves as somebody else sometimes. Hey, like, what would I say to somebody else? Would I say some of the things that I say to myself to somebody else? Most likely not. Would I ever tolerate seeing somebody say the things that I say to myself to somebody else? Most likely not. So you have to, one, imagine yourself as somebody else sometimes, put yourself kind of in an out-of-body experience. And the next thing is recognizing common humanity. Adam, have you ever made a mistake?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I have too. And I'm sure everyone that's on this call, they've made mistakes. And recognizing that everybody on this planet has made mistakes. Everybody before this time in history has made mistakes. Everybody moving from this point forward will make mistakes. We're all common in that. That's a common humanity. And recognizing that common humanity, and then recognizing how we feel about making mistakes and saying, you know what, again, coming back to, of course, I feel this way. I tripped on the way up the stage after being recognized at the pinnacle of my career, and now I'm embarrassed and I feel that I'm an idiot. Well, yes, feeling that I'm embarrassed, that's, of course I feel this way, but telling myself I'm an idiot, that's not okay. That's not okay. Right. You gotta, yeah. So you got to recognize when you start to kind of call yourself out for experiencing something, and backtrack and say, okay, yes, of course I feel this way, I'm embarrassed, but I'm not an idiot, I'm a human being. Yes. And that's I think where you can start to develop a lot of self-compassion. And then the last thing that I teach on regularly with self-compassion is that, Adam, I'm sure before you got on this call, you put on some type of mask or some type of armor, just as I did. You know, you are not the same on this call as you are when you're at home by yourself. We all are different people, not necessarily better or worse. We're just slightly different. And we're all fighting a battle of our own, fighting some type of battle, whether it's, you know, an emotional battle, a mental battle, a physical battle. We're fighting something. And we put on some armor or some type of mask before we go out into the world. And we look a certain way, we look like we're invincible, we look as though we have no vulnerabilities, but we know better about ourselves, right? We know that we have our own struggles. Well, when we know that about ourselves and we see these other people walking around perfect, walking around looking perfect with their masks and their armor on, we realize that underneath those masks and underneath that armor, they are fighting their own battles. And so now we have compassion for them. So
That's right.
understanding what it is we're going through allows us to understand not necessarily the details of what somebody else is going through, but we understand that they are going through something. And that
Mm,
helps our self-compassion grow compassion for others. So
yes.
sorry, again, that was another long soapbox, but I wanted to make sure I answered your question as best I could.
Powerful stuff, Jon. No, I'm so thankful that you did. And I see the comments coming in. It's funny because we're talking about mindfulness, and I feel like I'm in a distracted state as I see ding, ding. So pardon me if I had appeared any bit distracted, because your words are such that I think we all need to hold on to post this call, because we all do, we shield ourselves from the insecurities that we're feeling. Whereas if we can just be more aware of them and more vulnerable and share them, perhaps even in some occurrences, it makes us feel more secure with self. And then we create a deeper connection with the person on the other side of us.
Right.
And I love what you said about we're different people, because I pride myself on again being consistent. But the truth is, when I'm laying on my couch watching a movie, I don't have to be alert and on. I'm just disconnected. So we
Sure.
are that's challenged me to think a little different, because I guess in essence I am different. My values remain consistent, but the sheer nature of how it is that I'm showing up in my home versus out in the world is a little different. And I just wanted to, I don't have a question on the back end, and I just wanted to share for those who might have just joined us or those listening in, to kind of piggyback off of what you were saying. Looks like, did you see a question that came in?
I see. Well, one, I'm so glad Hind is on this call. He's saving me with my generation and Generation X. Thank you for that. And then he's come back with Jim Doty. We had Dr. Doty. Jim Doty is the author, the neurosurgeon that I was mentioning earlier.
Okay.
He's fantastic, and we've had him on our podcast. Fantastic man, and his book is called Into the Magic Shop. That was a life-changing book for me. So if you get a chance, check that out, Into the Magic Shop.
I've written
So
that
thank you,
down.
Hind, for, yeah. Let me see here. A couple of questions here. Would you say that the world rewarding social media engagement so much, like monetary, makes people want to be part of the social media game? Absolutely, it does. And I'm certainly not immune to that. I have a social media profile on almost all the different social media networks, and I have our podcast, Men Talking Mindfulness. We have it on YouTube, and we have a small following, like 2,500 people or something. And then I was watching YouTube with my son the other day. He likes to watch Ryan's World. It's this, I don't know if you've ever
Okay.
seen
I
Ryan's
don't
World,
know.
but it's basically this. It started with a little boy just unpackaging toys, and he would review these toys as a kid, a young kid.
Mm-hmm.
And it ended up, he's got millions and millions and millions of followers. And my son likes to watch some of those things. And I looked at it, I was like, how does this kid have, I don't know, 75 million followers? And then I looked it up, and he's making like $25 million a year as a kid. And yeah, 100%. I was like,
Wow.
oh my gosh, why can I not do that? And then I
Yeah.
realized, oh, well, now I'm falling victim to the very thing that I want to teach against is, hey, don't compare myself. Don't compare, because
Yes.
that's comparing is what makes anything that you feel special, anything that you feel is special in your life. You want to take away making it feel special, compare it to
Mm,
something else. If you think you have a great car, compare it to a Lamborghini. Now it's not so special. If you think you
mm,
have a great I don't know, house, compare it to a castle. Now it's not so special. So if you want to make yourself feel not special, compare yourself. And that's what social
mm.
media is doing. And I
Yes.
found myself doing that. So 100%, yes, I think social media and, being paid for the number of interactions and everything else, it's a slippery slope, and understanding that. And then let's see there. I know there was another question here. Let's see. Oh, okay. From Robbie. And I know we've worked with My Steady Mind. Thank you for that. I'm a father of a 2 and a 3-year-old. Oof. I've got 2 years in between my kids. I've got a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old, and that's a lot. So having a 2 and a 3-year-old simultaneously, that's tough. He says, what tips do you have for finding calm in the craziness of life with kids? Oh man, yeah, you're speaking my language here, brother.
I'm out
So
on this one. I know no kids for me. So
oh yeah, so on this screen over here, I've got a picture of my family, and I can look at them, and it's this perfect setting. It's taken by a professional photographer, and we look like the perfect family. And in the background of that same picture, there's a picture of my house, and I know what happens inside that house is not what you see in the picture. My kids are kids, and it's very easy to react as a father, and sometimes you want to react, like, hey, if they're about to burn themselves or jump off the top of the bunk bed, then hey, yeah, reaction is necessary. You need to react and save them from hurting themselves. But quite often the kids are throwing tantrums, and all three of them are doing it simultaneously. It's hard to find that calm in the craziness of life with kids. But what I have found works for me is, and I told my kids to tell me this, specifically my 4-year-old little boy, because he is a handful. I love him to death. He's a Sour Patch Kid. He can be the sweetest kid on the planet, and then 2 minutes later be pushing every single button that I have. But what I asked him to say is, if he starts to see that I'm getting upset, is for him to stop and say, Dad, or Daddy, Dada. He calls me Dada. Dada, I'm just a kid. And when he says that, man, it diffuses everything. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're right. You're just a kid. You're a 4-year-old little boy. Your brain is not fully developed. How can I get upset with you about this? And it kind of puts me makes me take a couple steps back. And when I take those couple of steps back, then I can breathe. And when I can breathe and put that breath in between the thought or the stimulus, right? We in the Mind Steady Mind program that Robbie's referencing, we talk about the stimulus, the thought, the emotion, and the action, the STEA, STEA. And if you can put a breath in between seeing or feeling that stimulus and the thought, that's going to change the associated emotion, and that's going to change the associated action. And when my son says, Dada, I'm just a kid, that boom puts that pause right there after the stimulus. And I think differently. And then the emotion and the associated action is different. So coming back to Robbie's question, I think, yes, it's never perfect. You're a parent, and you've got kids who are being kids, and they're learning how to live life. But here's the thing, so are you. You're learning to be a parent, right? And that's another thing, coming back to self-compassion and grace. We, as parents, we rarely give ourselves enough grace. We're like, oh my gosh, I lost my temper, I'm the worst parent. This is the first time I've ever been a parent. I don't know about you, Robbie. I'm assuming this is the first time you've been a parent. No matter how many kids you have, it's still the first time you're being a parent. It's the first time we're alive, right? We're learning just as the kids are. And so I think sometimes, now I'm not saying that we need to give ourselves grace all the time for every single thing and let ourselves off the hook, but understand, of course you feel this way when you've got 2 kids that are in diapers yelling and screaming, and you've also got other things in life pulling at you. Being a parent is tough. People ask me what the toughest thing I've ever done is, and they always expect me to tell them, hey, being a Navy SEAL and going through SEAL training was the hardest thing. No way. By far, the hardest thing I've ever done is be a parent. So give yourself some credit, give yourself some grace, and acknowledge that, of course, you feel this way when craziness is happening. And then also acknowledge that they're just kids. They're just kids. And when you can put it in that kind of frame, like, again, another reframe, and say, you know what? He's a 4-year-old boy. Of course he's acting this way. He's got, his brain isn't fully formed. He's got all sorts of hormones in him. Like, he's a young kid. So hopefully I answered your question there, Robbie.
That's great, John. As somebody who doesn't have kids, but want to, of course, I think you've definitely taught me something before I even get into parenthood that will be beneficial. I can only imagine how, when your 4-year-old son is saying, Dad, I'm just a kid. It just pulls at your heartstrings in such a way
Oh
that
man,
it's
totally.
a reminder that allows you to reset and recalibrate. I
Right.
want to be cautious of our times. I promise you an hour hard stop, and I do have a few. If you're okay to go a few minutes after, we
Sure.
can.
Yeah. Let
Um,
me I'm pretty sure I can. Yes, I can.
okay,
So yeah.
great. Great. This has been amazing, John, and your insights. And I knew it would be not only your delivery, the tone, and the passion, but the insights to the tactical piece, for lack of a better word. Because it's one thing to have inspiration, but another thing to have some strategies that we can rely on to get better and to improve. So it's been amazing. I'd like to go back to something you said at the very beginning of this conversation, to your level of comfort, that you'd be willing to share, because you mentioned that what got you into mindfulness was something that didn't happen on the battlefield, but happened while you were on the radios. Would you
Right.
mind sharing about that experience? I'd heard you on another podcast kind of highlight it, and I know it might be sensitive. You might not want to recount those memories, but if you're willing, would you mind sharing with the listeners exactly what that encounter was, that maybe was the trigger for you that sent you down a spiraling path of negativity?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would. And I don't have a problem sharing with it because I've done a lot of work in this area, and actually sharing it is very cathartic for me. In and of the sharing itself is cathartic, but then I know that, again, coming back to knowing somebody else is fighting a battle, maybe somebody else listening now or later, they're fighting their own battle and hearing something that may resonate with them to help them. And my knowing that my story helps others is cathartic in a second level. So in 2005, I was in Afghanistan. I was attached to SEAL Team 10. And I say attached to, I wasn't at SEAL Team 10. I was attached to because I was actually part of what's called SEAL Delivery Vehicle Team 2. So SDV Team 2. And the SEAL Delivery Vehicle is a miniature submarine. And the missions that the SDV team does, they're few and far between, or at least they were in 2005. And if your deployment window opens up and there's not a mission for the SDV, then typically you get attached to the regular quote unquote teams. So from SDV Team 2, my deployment window opened up, and there was no national mission for the miniature submarine for the SDV. So they attached me to SEAL Team 10. Now, the SDV guys, we are reconnaissance experts. That's our primary kind of bread and butter mission. And SEAL Team 10, their primary mission, yes, they do reconnaissance, but that's not their bread and butter. Their primary mission is assault. Or called direct action. They take down enemy targets, right? Capture and kill targets. And there was one particular mission in Afghanistan that needed a lot of surveillance and reconnaissance prior to the assault. So they looked at me and my element from SDV Team 2, and there was also an element from SDV Team 1, SDV Team 1 out in Hawaii. Now, I know I'm going into a lot of details, but it lays the foundation here. Mm-hmm. SDV Team 1 sent 6 guys out to Afghanistan to be attached to SEAL Team 10. And with them was Michael Murphy, who, if you've ever heard of the Murph workout in CrossFit, it's named after him. Michael Murphy, Marcus Luttrell, and several others, Matt Axelson. Those are the 3 big names that you kind of remember from this operation. Operation Red Wings comes up on our deployment. There's a lot of reconnaissance required for it. We send Michael Murphy, Marcus Luttrell, and Matt Axelson, along with Danny Dietz from my group, out to do surveillance and reconnaissance. And they get compromised by some goat herders. And at that point, the big ethical dilemma comes up. What do I do? Do we kill these guys? They're non-combatants, so you can't kill them. You can't tie them up, because being tied up in the middle of the mountains in Afghanistan, you may as well be killing them. So you can't tie them up. So really the only thing that you can do that's ethically correct and by the letter of the law, as far as rules of engagement is let them go. So
Mm.
our guys let them go, and they go down the hill, they go down the mountain, and they tell the Taliban in this village that there's soldiers on the mountain observing them. And now this massive group of Taliban go up to fight 4 men on the battlefield.
Mm.
This ends up being a massive firefight. The 4 SEALs do really well as far as they're outnumbered, and they turned it into a pretty huge fight. They put up a good fight, is what I'm trying to say. And we end up losing Matt Axelson and Danny Dietz, and then Michael Murphy gets on the radio to call back for help, a quick reaction force, what we call a QRF. And he gets me on the phone, and Murph and I were friends, and he tells me that he's got guys dying on the battlefield. I knew Danny, I knew Marcus, I knew Matt Axelson. And Danny was in my platoon, and now I know, okay, these guys are in a massive firefight. And then I hear on the radio Murph say, I tell him, hey, I'll send out a quick reaction force. And he says, thanks, Mac. My last name is Macaskill, so I went by Mac. Most people call me Mac. And then while he's on the radio, he's actually on an Iridium cell phone. It's a satellite phone. He's on the phone with me. He gets shot in the back, and he got killed on the phone. And then I rally a quick reaction force of 2 helicopters filled with SEALs. And the first helicopter shows up, levels out to put guys onto the ground to help in this firefight in a fast rope. They look to fast rope these guys in, and the helicopter gets shot down. So there was another 8 Navy SEALs on that helicopter, and then 8 Army Night Stalkers as part of the air crew. And I heard all this happening on the radio. I knew it was happening. And here I was sitting behind a computer, listening to the radio, answering phones. And that's the last place I wanted to be. I wanted to be out there on the battlefield with those men. And that is that's what caused me on that kind of downward spiral. I spent the next 2 days awake trying to find out what had happened to the guys on the ground, because we lost radio contact with Murph pretty quickly after he got shot. Marcus Luttrell ended up being the lone survivor. If you've ever seen the movie Lone Survivor, read the book, that's the operation that I'm talking about. And we had no idea whether there were any survivors from the helicopter crash, which there were none. So spent time trying to find Marcus, because now we had an idea that there was a survivor, but we weren't for sure. And yeah, so that caused me the kind of the downward spiral that I was on. I came back from that deployment, escorted Michael Murphy, his body, and Danny Dietz's body back to the States. And I couldn't relate to my then wife. I've since remarried, but she couldn't understand what I had seen. I couldn't understand her vantage point. It caused a lot of strife in our marriage. And yeah, long story short, those were some of the causes of my struggles. And ultimately, now looking back, I feel that I'm better for having gone through that. I feel that I'm better for having shared it. I'm in a different place now than I ever would have been if I had not been through that. And then, I have a wonderful bride and 3 wonderful kids that are my pride and joy. And if I had been on the battlefield and I'd been killed, then, they wouldn't be here, or my wife would be here, but we wouldn't be together. My children wouldn't be here. So the way that I kind of think about it is, if you remember Saving Private Ryan, at the very end, when Tom Hanks looks at Private Ryan and he says, "Earn this," I feel that I'm here for a reason, and I feel that I'm earning my right to be here, knowing that my friends died on the battlefield that day. I'm earning my right to be here as a survivor and making other people's lives better through what I do now and through what I continued to do in the SEAL teams when I was still in. So that's my history.
Jon, thank you. My goodness, for such vulnerability and for just recounting those. I know, as you mentioned, therapeutic. I'm sure it's not the first and won't be the last time you shared. And it's not lost to me that it's an opportunity for you to remember their names, right? Very
Right.
intentionally,
For
you've
sure.
shared each of them, and everyone in the world knows their heroes. And I do know Lone Survivor of that movie is, it's touched me multiple times. I've watched Marcus's work from afar, just following on
Sure.
Instagram and so forth. And I imagine he, much like you, has felt so much survivor's guilt, but it appears that each of you have done such meaningful work with your pain. And that's the takeaway I want to take from this, Jon, for everyone
Thank
listening
you.
here, is that we all may be faced with different things. I'm not even going to pretend like I can fathom to relate to what it was like in those moments. And I don't think anyone on this call likely can either. But if we can all take a piece of wisdom from that, and what I'm taking is this: when we are faced with heartache, with pain, with heartbreak, with something that feels insurmountable, we have a choice as to how we'll respond. Either allow it to define us, where we stay in this negative pattern, or we use it for betterment. And I thank you for using it for betterment, Jon. So thank you.
Thank you, Adam. I appreciate that. No,
Yeah.
and thank you for giving me a platform to share this too. I certainly appreciate that. The opportunity to share that story and everything else that we've discussed today. This has been a fantastic opportunity. And real quick, I'll just answer Hin's question
Yes.
about the
Yeah.
compassion program. Yes, that's the one, the 8-week compassion course, and I see they've got one starting January 17th. So Will, my co-host, sings its praises, and I'm learning a lot secondarily, sure,
Yeah. Yeah.
through him.
That's right. Good. Good. Love it, Jon. Real quick, if we can, I know we're just a minute past. I think you said you had a few minutes, and it looks like you had another comment from Carlos and some others here. So thank you all for being such a
So, yeah,
wonderful audience too. For those who are on, um, one of the things that we're striving to do, and I told you a little bit about mindful journey on the front end. You've already given us so much wisdom, but for somebody who might be listening into this later and doesn't get a chance to listen to this whole conversation, for a person who might be going through some of their own hurt today, Jon, and they can't relate to maybe some of the military analogies or mindfulness practices, if they're just in a deep negative state, what's your message to that individual? If you could just envision them on the other side of you, what's your
yeah,
message to them today?
yeah. I actually had a good friend reach out this morning and say that she was struggling mentally. I won't go into the details, but bottom line is she was just reaching out, and I told her, hey, if you're able to take some time for yourself and sit with that feeling, and don't judge, I referenced this before, but don't judge yourself for feeling the way that you're feeling. You could just be down and not even know why, but maybe
Mm-hmm.
you have a hormone imbalance, or maybe you have like I talked about before, maybe the body is keeping the score and something is bubbling up inside you emotionally, and you don't even know why, but something happened to you weeks ago, years ago, maybe even decades ago, that's now bubbling up, and you're experiencing the emotions that are tied to that. Give yourself some time to sit with it, be with it. Don't judge yourself. Give yourself some grace, some compassion, and then I think look at what it is you're experiencing and why it is, if you're able to, and tell yourself again, of course I feel this way. And then that I've found to be incredibly helpful when I'm down. I mean, I was, again, as a mindfulness and meditation, we're not mindfulness and meditation teacher, we're not immune to feeling down. And I was feeling down and out 2 weeks ago, and I was like, oh, okay, time to practice what I preach and sit with
Yeah.
this. And as uncomfortable as it is, like, it's uncomfortable to be sad. Like, you're like, well, this hurts. I shouldn't be sad. I've got to get out of this, right? The natural instinct is, I've got to get out of this. Well, sometimes it to get out of it, you truly do have to just sit with it and be with it.
Mhm.
And that's the way. That is the way to get through it. So
Great, great conclusion. We'll pause there. Jon, thank you again so much. I'll connect with you offline. And thanks for all those who are still
Thank you,
on with
brother.
us here at the end. Looking forward to connecting with you all. And again, Jon, hope our paths will cross in person soon. Have a great day,
Indeed.
everyone.
Indeed. Take care.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
thanks.